So, hello, Terry. Welcome to Welldoing. Good to see you.
Lovely to see you, Louise, and always exciting to see what Welldoing is up to.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Because you gave us pieces back in the early days, and they're still there. They're still read. But
Yes,
now you've written a book about grandparents.
yes.
What led you to that subject?
First of all, it was my own experience. I mean, looking back, I'm a little embarrassed that it wasn't until I became a grandparent that I realized how this relationship has been sidelined, marginalized, that grandparents themselves are seen as kind of wallflowers that they have a little walk-in part here and there, but they're not really central in any way to family life. And when I became a grandparent, I realized that my stereotype or my bias about grandparents really needed to be challenged. It was nothing like my experience, which was that instead of becoming less important to the family, I took on a new importance to the family. Um, both working, I have two daughters, both of them are in very demanding careers. And my first daughter, my oldest daughter, was really struggling when she had her baby, and certainly when she went back to work after maternity leave. She was trying to get going from a 5 day a week to a 4 day a week. She's an engineer, that was unheard of. Um, and it was 13 years ago. So I think things have changed a little bit for the better. But nonetheless, she, like so many young women with demanding careers, discovered a great difference in the employer's response to a female employee having a baby and a male employee having a baby. So male employees who had a child were seen to be more reliable, likely to be more motivated, certainly right for promotion now that they were a family man. Whereas a woman coming back from maternity leave was seen as someone who was less likely to pull her weight, perhaps needed to be treated gently by the employer, and certainly not in a position for promotion. And they had to do a wait and see. So grandparents can be very important, particularly for a daughter or daughter-in-law's career in that wait and see moment when they want to show that they too have something like a wife at home looking after their child, ready to step up in an emergency. And so I was willing to do that. I think there was also a more fundamental sense of my role with her, and that was I remembered my own experience of becoming a mother, and that claustrophobia, the isolation, the sense that my life is totally transformed. I can't go out of the house without making sure that I have ticked off a whole list of things. And that walking around with free hands, a free mind, that was that became such a luxury. And I wanted to be able to offer that to her, or at least moments of that to her. So that was my first step in taking a very, very new look at the role of grandparent. But it wasn't until I heard from parents how they would be interested in looking at the looking at cross-generational relationships and how they worked and what the challenges were and what was likely to go wrong and what the benefits were and how to navigate them. It was parents' interest in this that motivated me to write the book. So I became a parent 13 years ago, but it wasn't until I heard from parents about their interest in the three generational family and how it worked that I decided to write a book about grandparenting.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, Terry, that if we think further back,
Yeah.
like at the beginning of the 20th century, for example, grandmothers, they would have been younger. They would probably not have been working in the kinds of jobs that you or your daughter or me or, most of us have. They wouldn't have, there was no such thing as maternity leave, etc. So grandmothers were often the people picking up the school kids at the gate and also looking after babies. And then we had the working mother kind of, you and I are probably from that same time when it was just happening, just starting. And actually, childcare wasn't that difficult to get and it wasn't that expensive. And I think that's been the real shocker for parents today, how much to have someone like a nanny or an au pair. I don't think I've yet to meet one of my daughter's friends or friends, uh, you know, of that age who actually has one. They all have other kinds of setups that are much, much cheaper, but then not cheap either. So it's
Yeah.
a very difficult thing, I think, for new parents today.
Well, the cost of childcare in the UK
Yeah,
is tremendous.
yeah,
I think it's something like at least £15,000 a year. That's a big chunk of
yeah.
most people's income. Now, if we go back to so I'm older than you, probably at least 10 years. So when I uh, when I was a young mother, it was just when the university was setting up a child care
Mm,
uh, facility. So there was very, very little. But I wouldn't have expected um, any help, any regular help from grandparents.
mm,
Some people were getting it, but at that time, it was more thought to be, a working class thing.
mhm,
So if you think of Michael Young looking at kinship networks in the East End of London in the 1950s, the grandmother did a lot and was a big force in the family, but he was looking at working class families. And in middle class families, for me, it was either I could get some kind of childcare, outsource it, and it was affordable, or I could get help with my husband, which, which, the sense of that generation's the sense of what help was from a male of that generation was sort of minimal. Doing a little bit seemed like a lot.
mm.
So for me, it was either paid childcare or my career, and I think that a lot of grandmothers today have that sense of if I'm not there if I'm not helping, if I can't help out in some way, then it will affect my daughter or daughter-in-law's career. And so here I am, a feminist who fought against the presumption that I would step into caring roles. And I juggled it when I was dealing with my own career, with some success, some failure, some real career costs. But now it's over. And then suddenly it's not over because you see, well, if I don't go to a conference, if I don't give a paper, if I don't take on a client, yes, it's a career hit, but it's not at this stage in my life as big a hit as it would be to my daughter and daughter-in-law to make the same concession or to make the same difficult choice or what some grandmothers called the hard choices that they had to make. I mean, many of them were still rather rattled by how much they asked of their children in terms of ad hoc childcare. So they don't want their daughters to have to make those same difficult choices, either difficult for their careers or difficult for their children. And a grandmother stepping in is a much, a safer pair of hands, of family hands. Um, Everyone will know that they love the child as much as that child needs to be loved. So it's much easier. The handover is much easier. And this is why 1/3 of working mothers rely on their grandparents for some kind of childcare. And why nearly 2/3 of grandmothers with younger grandchildren are offering regular childcare, round about 10 to 12 hours a week. So not full time, but quite a lot.
Mm.
And the bit about, it's so interesting how things have changed about, you say they don't have nannies. Well, they don't have au pairs post Brexit, and they don't have nannies because that's a hit from expensive housing. They don't have houses that are big enough.
Right. Mm.
So that's another reason why grandparents are so important. And the grandmothers of today are more determined to rope the grandfathers in as well.
Yeah.
And the grandfathers are generally quite willing, probably more willing and wise about what it takes to offer help than they were as young fathers. Yeah, so a lot of grandmothers were saying, I wish I had been this insistent when I had young children. I wish I had been so clear. So they're more assertive too, and they're more wise about what it is I have to ask for to get that help. I have to be quite specific. I might have to explain what it is that would help in this particular situation. Can you play with the little boy while I deal with the baby? Or facilitating the proactivity of the grandfather.
And what about between the grandmother and the daughter, or I guess I'm specifically thinking of a daughter. Did you meet many who felt that in some way the grandmother wanted to, perhaps make up for any of the things that they had felt that their work, their lives had taken away from their child when the child was young?
Well, as I said, grandmothers felt that that's what they were doing. It would all too often, the daughter would then say, "You were never this patient with me. You never had this much time for me." So what the grandmother is offering the grandchildren then becomes a point of contention between her and the daughter. Sometimes this is, just a little ripple in the emotional weather and it goes. But sometimes it can, really be a hit for the mother. My gosh, is that how she feels? How deep is this? It was rarely, it rarely killed the relationship, but it's hurtful to hear that your daughter feels that you really didn't do well as a mother. And the daughter herself often doesn't understand why it is she feels so irritated by the mother. Here she knows she needs the help. She has gratitude for it. Nonetheless, she doesn't want her mother taking over. So we go back to the who's in charge question that often activates a lot of the teen mother-daughter issues. Who are you to tell me what to do? Your suggestions sound to me like criticism. remember these boundaries. So there's a lot of negotiation around that. And there can be a lot of hypersensitivity, especially in the early days of being a new mother. You
Mm.
have a new baby, you have an enormous amount of weight of that, am I a good enough mother question. You have a new baby whom you don't yet know, and you're working overtime to get to know that child and interact with that child effectively. So for a grandmother to step in and say, oh, the baby's tired, it's too bright in here, turn out the lights, do this, put her on her side, do this, can really feel like it feels like criticism. It's also a distraction because the new mother's brain is so hyper alert to the child and wants to get to know the child and is so attentive that any other interpretation um, can be very confusing and irritating. So there's a lot of that.
So when you're getting this, adding in this new generation,
Yeah.
you're adding a whole, big change in the family dynamics, would you say?
Oh, I think an enormous change. So suddenly the grandmother is a mother to a mother to or mother to a parent, and there can be an enormous reward from that, seeing my child be a good parent. Yes, I know I messed up and I missed out and I neglected this, but if she's such a good mother, I did okay. So there can be an enormous amount of reward from seeing your child be a parent, but it's also a different kind of relationship. And I remember years ago looking at the research on that and what the research focused on. There's an equality. We're both mothers now. We both know what it's like. And there's a lot of new mothers said, I didn't realize how much my mother loved me. This kind of love is really so powerful. But it isn't only equality that you get, it's also the parent is in charge. That's how we read it. That's what we both believe. So the grandmother may feel an attachment to this child as strong as to any child of hers, and yet she is not the one in charge of its care, overseeing its care. She's the one who has to sort of step aside and let her daughter and say son-in-law take charge, and that can be difficult. I'm the veteran parent. I know things. Why aren't they listening to me? So that's something to navigate as well. And then you have a very different relationship with your in-law, who is also now a parent and now in charge. And you know, it's another reminder of how your kinship with your bloodline has changed. And I found that, there were a lot of grandparents who said, I had doubts about my child-in-law before, but he or she is such a good parent. That's wonderful. But there were equally grandparents who became newly critical of a child-in-law. He doesn't pull his own weight. She's so rigid in the way she approaches what's good for the baby. Um, I think a lot of grandparents have to accept that they might be hypercritical of a child-in-law as well. Go easy on yourself. A lot of the feelings that grandparents have are inconsistent with their sense that they're very fair, they're always trying, they're always, looking in terms of trust and admiration towards the new family. I think, they have to accept that they're going to have a, some doubts, some hesitations, and some anxieties that they can't deal with directly with their children or children-in-law.
So would your advice to grandparents be to remember that they are not where the power lies anymore?
I think they have power. I don't think they should give up on having influence. One of the most common snippets of advice that grandparents tell me they get is bite your tongue. And there are constant jokes about, my tongue is sore for because I'm always biting it. I can see why people give that advice. I can see that if you don't say something in the moment, then that can avoid, not speaking can sometimes help the surface harmony, but it doesn't help with the ease of a relationship or the depth of the relationship. It's not really good for you or good for your health to think I've got to keep stum. So I would think about finding ways to have a conversation without being bossy about it, without saying this is how you should do it.
Mm.
And I know that most grandparents will say, well, I never say that. I never say this is what you should do or this is what you have to do. But if you observe grandparents, that it's very easy for them to fall into a sort of dogmatic tone of voice where they do appear to be telling you what to do, even though I'm sure they're just making a suggestion. But if you say, well, we're both invested in this. You're having trouble getting your child to sleep. Have you thought about trying this? Having trouble getting your child to comply, getting to school or preschool on time, or getting out of the house. There are these endless delays. And my sense is that what you're doing may not be helping. Can we try another way? Or have you thought about another way? This may well be unwelcome. This may well get a brusque response. I don't think that's so bad. I don't think I'm not the what I'm thinking about when I think about navigating cross-generational relationships is not coming up with a list of things that is going to bring perfect harmony. I don't think that's the goal. I think what you want is a relationship in which it's okay to disagree, it's okay to snap, because within these family relationships, you're going to be tired, you're going to be fed up, there's going to be too much going on, you're going to be under stress. And so not to be afraid of the snap, or what someone might call a little bit of rudeness. Worrying about avoiding arguments at all costs and falling into what I call the good behavior syndrome can be stressful in its own way. And a less stressful way is being able to disagree, maybe being able to quarrel, but with the knowledge that this can be repaired. There's going to be a way out, that this little tiff isn't a signal that everything's going to fall apart.
Okay, that's great, and I think lots of people would agree with you, and hopefully that does help ease things over the kind of generational differences. What about the relationship with the actual grandchild? Once you're past the baby
Yes. Yeah.
phase, do you think that grandparents, we can talk grandmothers if you like, do you feel that women of our age can have different and kind of modern relationships with grandchildren?
Oh, definitely. But it takes work. So the easy bit is that overwhelming grandparent swoon um, state where the baby is just delightful. Holding a baby again, isn't it wonderful? Interacting with the baby, just having that physical closeness, that's wonderful. It sometimes takes grandparents a little bit by surprise how quickly that changes and how quickly grandchildren change. So, I think I've got the perfect gift, the perfect set of books, and the perfect piece of clothing. And then when I deliver them with great pride, it's only, let's say, been 6 weeks since I've seen them. They're already past that stage. I can see that. By the age of, 5 or 6 or certainly 7, a young child may be very excited about seeing grandparents, but less likely to enjoy that big hug, that crush to the bosom, big um, the big pressing kiss. They want a different kind of relationship, and they don't want the gushing praise that you give a 2 or 3 year old where everything is wonderful. They're more discriminating about what kind of praise works for them. They want someone to be paying attention to what their interests are, what they're actually achieving, what their goals are. So it takes work and sort of stepping back from that gushing love that you still have to realize it's a different kind of a relationship that they're wanting from you. And you can bring them into things that interest you, and you can go to things that interest them. And one of the things that surprised me most was how even teenagers could be very receptive to a relationship with parents, grandparents, find that very important, very supportive, as long as grandparents were genuinely interested in who they wanted to be, who they were trying to become, and weren't a sort of proxy parent arguing about grades and studying. And it's easier, I think, for grandparents to be more relaxed about that. They've seen it all. They've seen their children presumably thrive in some way, but differently from how they planned it. And therefore, they're less focused on every little detail, about how they're doing in school. They're more aware that there can be successes and failures, and yet an overall successful person at the end of the road or in adulthood. So teen boys, in fact, if you ask them who's the person you trust most in your family, we're very often likely to say it's a grandfather. My grandfather, I can do things with him. He's not on my case all the time. He doesn't judge me. For teens, not being judged is a big thing. And they felt safer than with grandparents. And even sometimes in therapy, you ask a very anxious person, well, can you imagine or think about a place that you felt safe? And many will say it was with a grandparent. So it may be work to keep up with a changing grandchild, but it's certainly worth it.
And did you come upon any research which shows it's good for the grandparents to be grandparents?
Yes, certainly, certainly. So, in my study is a small one, but looking at much larger ones, grandparents who spend, say, 1 week a day with their grandchildren are less likely to get dementia, have better physical and mental health than people their age who don't engage with grandchildren. When you look at how children learn, and they're such careful and intent observers of things around them, seeing new things, full of imagination. This looking at the world with a child's eye, which is what grandparents do when they engage in play with their young grandchildren, this is a real boost to their cognitive abilities. So, such engagement is certainly a win-win for all generations.
That's great, Terri. Thank you very much. I've got a copy of your book, which I'll just hold up because you may be too shy to do the hard sell, but
Okay.
it's terrific, and I'm sure it will do very well, as there are a lot of grandparents very keen to have good relationships with both their children, in-laws, etc., and their grandchildren. You know, they're sort of
Also, to give grandparenting its due in terms of the family. So, there's been so much work in the past decades on flexing our idea of what a family is in terms of who the parents are, but much less work in terms of looking at the multi-generational family, how important that is, and giving grandparents their due and their dignity and their status.
yeah, terrific. Thanks very much, Terri.
My pleasure, Louise, as always.